sit up here then?
Yeah. As long as you can be far away.
Musical chairs?
The only problem is you'll be Joanna on the mic. You just have to know that you're Joanna.
What's that?
Oh.
I'm gonna be Joanna today.
That I've got to see.
The mics are programmed, right? So if he sits at Joanna's spot,
Yeah.
it looks like it's Joanna.
Yeah, I get it.
As long as you're good with that.
I'll get it.
Right, your operation.
Well, those three, do those mics have the right names on them?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just Rob.
Yeah. You'll only just have to remember that Rob.
So you didn't get any email from Joanna or?
Not with any questions.
Hmm.
They both just answered me though regarding calling them. So, well, I'm going to call them right now. So let's ask them.
So if you were curious,
Give it a
that's
shot.
all that education referral stuff that came out yesterday. This is the language
Oh, you're
that
out
the
live.
province was using.
We're recording this, so you know.
Okay. So just about the language they're using for the girls. So they're encouraging it, but they don't.
I'll throw the question out just.
Sure, yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning, Joanna. How are you?
Fine, I'm trying to figure out how to disconnect my cell phone from mine.
I'm just going to
Oh,
put
that's
you
fine.
on hold for 1
Turn it
second so I
down.
can conference in Esme, and then I should be right back.
Okay, no problem.
Where's the copy?
Good morning, Esme. It's Cheryl. How are you?
Where'd you find the copy?
So do you, actually. I think, can you come closer to your phone? I'm standing right off the phone.
I'm right on top of the phone.
Yeah, we can hear you. I'm just going to conference in Joanna too, and I'll have both of you two. Stand by. All right, now I should have both Joanna and Esme.
Hi.
Hi. Hi, yay for us. All right. Do either of you have any questions that you were going to email me?
I was gonna bring my hockey stick.
Who's this? She's not coming.
Okay. I just asked Chelsea to
Oh,
write it down.
we don't have to worry about the proper,
What?
the education tax.
What the what?
The education tax.
No, I know it.
It says in the report that we're not being charged.
Thank you.
Don't touch the corner.
You know how to get transaction spread, right? It's screwed.
Oh, okay. So I think that's just an administrative piece. I don't think it's.
Where I won, my money goes. Second house outside.
Oh, I know.
Instantly.
I
I was totally fine when I left the house. The moment I got outside, I'm like, oh, ready to go.
I woke up on Saturday. And it was like,
You know, kids are normal. They can get her in.
But I know.
the whole day, I was like,
To be sure it works.
is it really sore? I was like, I was trying to make it sore.
Recollect. Because like I was playing,
Sorry, I missed that. See, it's gonna be hard to
I was playing video games like every morning. Super stuff. And I was like, out of the back of my office, and I'm like, I should be sick right
Mute
now.
your phone because it's not gonna line up with the video. Yeah. And we should be starting in a few minutes. All right. How are you? Technology is one of my thoughts.
You hold your breath when you go by.
I said I was just gonna get the.
I'm like, in case anyone is watching this, we are testing the system. As we are, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Whoops. Apparently, really well.
Okay, we're ready to go. All the technology's up and running. So at this point, I'll call to order the meeting of council for Tuesday, March the 24th. Are there changes, additions to the agenda? Ms. Hyde? Oh, Ms. DeSoto?
Thank you, Mayor Borelman. Yes, administration would like to provide an update on the actions and response that we've been taking to the COVID-19 health emergency. And so the appropriate place on the agenda is under J, reports from administration, but perhaps you could move that to the start of the agenda for the meeting. So COVID-19 response update, J1, and hear that prior to new business.
Thank you. So the agenda will be amended to have J1 added and to come after G, I guess, just before new business. Move the amended agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Yeah. So because we have two councillors phoning in, we'll wait for their vote. If anybody's actually watching this at home, it may be slow and painful for a while. We're making some of this up as we go along.
Is that Joanna?
Yeah, that's Joanna.
Thanks, Sally.
I washed my hands, but I touched the handle.
Counselor?
I hear you. Lynn Powell says aye.
Counselor Bigler also, thank you, thank you.
Okay, so the motion's
And my comfort says aye.
Thank you.
motion's approved unanimously. There are no minutes to approve. Moving down then, item J1, update from administration. Ms. DeSoto.
Thank you, Mayor Borelman, and members of council. I'm happy to have this opportunity to provide an update to council and to the community because I know that there are a number of questions, and I believe I will potentially answer some of those questions during my update. I'd appreciate it if maybe you allow me to just work through the update and then we can open it to question and answer. So firstly, I do want to acknowledge that this is an uncertain and confusing time for our community and for indeed the world. It is understandable that many are anxious and fearful for the future. So it's most important at this time that we reach out to our friends and neighbors in kindness to offer encouragement, support, and assistance where needed. And I'd like to thank the many in our community that are already doing that. And to ensure those that are watching the community's response, that at the town, we are working tirelessly to manage and respond to the steady flow of information that's coming in and to the variety of sources of that information. And we're constantly evaluating and evolving our response to the most up-to-date information. And because there is conflicting information across provinces, across the country, and across the world, we are relying on the information coming from the Provincial Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, as a source of truth and fact that we need to respond to and the direction that we need to follow. It's important to note that at the town of Canmore, we don't have health professionals. We don't have access to the data or the expertise that the Provincial Medical Officer of Health and her team have. So they are making policy decisions in the best interests of all Albertans and all communities across this province. And so we have been relying on that expertise and their ability to interpret the steady flow of data. And I know, Mayor Borrellman, that you have also spoken with Dr. Mike Wickham, the medical director for the Canmore Hospital, and he has been providing some updates to the community on the state of readiness of our own local hospital, and we thank him for doing that. So as noted, we are putting the full resources of the municipality towards our response and towards supporting our own staff and supporting the community. You know, the first time we met as administration was just a couple of weeks ago, well, I guess 3 weeks ago now, March 5th, and then within the next week, things really ramped up in Canada. And so on March 13th, we enacted an Emergency Coordination Center, what we call an ECC, and we have been meeting twice daily as an ECC team ever since that time. And initially our focus was to make sure we have business continuity planning and to make sure that we could maintain essential services for the community and provide information and support to both our staff and to the community. And as new information became available and provincial direction was arriving and changing daily, we quickly responded and coordinated our operations based on our own hazard assessments and clear advice coming from the province. So last Monday, we completely shut down Elevation Place in the Canmore Recreation Centre, as I know you're aware of that. And that was a full 24 hours ahead of getting provincial direction to close municipal recreation facilities. That was done by some great work initially from our teams in those facilities to assess the hazards and the direction to ensure social distancing in facilities. And it was determined that we could not ensure that social distancing could occur. And so we shut Elevation Place in the rec center on Monday. And by week's end, we also closed the rest of our buildings, the Public Works building and Civic Center, to public access. Now, we have been able to redeploy many of our full-time staff that were working in recreation mostly to other tasks. However, unfortunately, as of yesterday, we did have to issue temporary layoffs to many casual and contract staff in our recreation area. Also, in order to support our residents and businesses through these difficult days, over the weekend, our communications team worked to completely revamp our website and provide a very detailed FAQ, or frequently asked question and answer sections, in a host of variety of subject matter. And as of yesterday, our emergency social services group activated a call center that will operate 7 days a week. Now, we encourage anyone who needs support, perhaps feels confused or a bit uncertain about what actions they should take personally within their home, within their business, or how best they could help their neighbors or help their community, to call in and talk to us. We have people standing by ready to take your call and to offer some advice and support and to direct or collate community resource information. Now, there's a couple of questions I know that Council has been asked regularly, especially over this weekend as the weather was beautiful and people, both residents and visitors, were flocking outside into the mountains. So I will try to answer some of those questions now. So the first question is why the town of Canmore hasn't declared a state of local emergency. And as I say, we are constantly evaluating whether or not we need to do that. Typically, a state of local emergency is declared when the resources of the municipality are insufficient to address the emergency at hand. And you can think back to the 2013 floods when we really needed to rely on outside expertise and support in contractors and other government levels to support our response here. As noted, because this is a health emergency, there isn't an incident that we are responding to or that we have control over that response to that health incident. So we are deferring to the medical experts who have that data and can interpret it and give us policy directions. But we have taken actions to set up an emergency coordination center, to set up an emergency social services team, to close facilities, to limit access to public spaces. And those are all actions under our control that we can do without declaring a state of local emergency. A local emergency would give us additional powers, things like evacuating people or seconding equipment, even demolishing property in order to mitigate an incident. None of those are required at this point in time. I do understand that the public might think because we haven't declared a state of emergency that we're not giving it the seriousness and the weight of attention that the issue deserves, and I want to assure the community and council that that is not true. The full weight of our organization is on this crisis, and we will continue to evaluate it, and if there is a reason to declare a state of local emergency in the future, we will certainly do that. The next question is how come we haven't closed the town to tourists? And the answer to that is simply we do not have the authority or the resource capacity to enforce a restriction of movement of people in or out of our community. Only the province and federal government can close highways or close airports, as we've seen with the federal government restricting travel from around the world. And there are many, many reasons why people need to get in and out of our community. You can think of coworkers, friends who don't live in our community but need to come to our community for work, for access to services, to attend important appointments, to visit loved ones who need their support. And so to be able to manage that flow of people in and out is just not something that we can do. A state of local emergency wouldn't allow us to do that either. That is strictly within the provincial or federal government's control, closing access off the highway and into our community. We could certainly restrict movement and close roads within our community, and we had to do that during the 2013 floods, and if that is something that we feel is necessary to do in the future, we can certainly take those actions. Most recently, there has been a call to have the town close outdoor playgrounds, and we are evaluating that action. Public health officials continue to repeat that social distancing and proper hygiene is the best way to stem the spread of the virus. And they're also saying that being outdoors remains one of the best sort of mental health opportunities we can give ourselves and our families as we live through restricted movements. So getting outdoors is still encouraged. Getting outdoors with following social distancing or physical distancing practices, as I believe people are now calling it, is important. So we took the action yesterday to sign playgrounds. We hadn't done that up until this point, where we are reminding parents who are taking their children there that social distancing needs to be practiced, that people need to follow proper hygiene practices. And we will continue to monitor that situation, and if we find that we cannot manage the proper use of those facilities, then we can close them. Again, though, it's very difficult to enforce those kinds of actions, and we are relying on the citizens in the Canmore, visitors to our community, to be socially responsible and to understand that their actions impact on others. So, if a family was to arrive at a playground and see that there was another family already using the tot lap, that maybe they would have to move on or, make sure that there was the appropriate social distancing happening. As I said, we will continue to monitor that, and we have an ECC meeting later today that we will evaluate some of the feedback we're getting from our parks team who are monitoring those playgrounds. The last question that I know has been asked several times is why we're continuing to hold council meetings in public. And based on our attendance here, the public certainly got the message not to attend and to watch the online streaming of this council meeting. The province has made it clear and in fact sent out communiques to all municipalities that the Municipal Government Act requires that council meetings be open to the public. So we do not have the ability to defy this legislation. If we didn't have our meeting open to the public, the decisions we make here today could be called into question. So it's important that we do follow the legislation that we're governed by. It's also information that I can share that the province is planning on making amendments to the Municipal Government Act. They're working through their own internal processes to do that, but we do anticipate in the near future that they might modify some of those restrictions and allow us to close the meeting to public access if we live stream, for example. And we may be able to move towards complete virtual meetings. So just that there's a number of other actions that are currently underway or in the planning stages, so I wanted to make council aware of them. Because we had to close, or made the decision, I should say, to close Elevation Place and Canmore Rec Centre, we are taking the steps to advance the maintenance of those facilities that normally happen later in the year to this time where they're currently closed. So we'll be taking out the ice surfaces and draining the pool and starting the maintenance program so that we won't have to close those facilities again later this year. We are also identifying all essential service workers and putting in place resourcing strategies to ensure that we can continue to service the community in the event that we should lose a chunk of our staff. We're evaluating how we can move to virtual council meetings. We're doing a lot of our own virtual meetings through staff, through a program called Zoom. Whether or not we can do that with council meetings in the future is something we're looking into. We're putting contingency plans in place for some of our large capital projects that are moving forward. The TIP 20 project and the Cougar Creek debris retention structure project have moved into the tender phases, and we want to make sure that we're prepared should we not be able to deliver those projects on schedule. And we are also reviewing some of our other capital projects to see if there's any merit to deferring them or postponing in any way. So I guess just in closing, certainly I want to give a huge shout out to the frontline workers in our community, from those in the health profession to those the grocery store clerks and others who are really working hard to make sure that all of our needs can be met. And also to our town staff, it has not been business as usual. Many of our departments are impacted, from our recreation and facilities that we've already talked about, to our corporate services team. The amount of HR, communications, and IT support that has had to go into allowing us to continue to serve the community has been incredible. Our FCSS team has worked to set up that call center and provide those social services supports. And the corporate strategic group, the three general managers who are here today, we make up the emergency coordination center and have been working pretty much exclusively on this response. So with that, I will open it up to any questions that council might have.
Thank you very much, Ms. DeSoto. And just before we get into that, it occurs to me that I should perhaps, just for the record, note that Councillors Comfort and McCallum are both in attendance at this meeting. They're watching the live streaming, and they're connected through the telephone with the municipal clerk, and we will be asking them to provide their votes on any motions. So for those at home or in the future watching this recording, we do have 7 members of council here for this meeting. With that, thank you for the presentation. I've certainly been in conversation with you daily, so most of what you've said, all of what you've said, I'm certainly familiar with, but it's hard to make sure as the mayor that I'm getting all of the messaging out to the councillors. So this was a good opportunity to have the rest of council know what's happening exactly, and for the community. We're doing a tremendous amount of public messaging, and thanks to Robin Dinaj and her team. I mean, they're not here today, but it reminds me to a large extent of we talk about 2013 a lot, but there's a lot of comparisons. And as soon as the flood occurred and we declared an emergency, we established some really, really incredible messaging, communication programs led by our own Sally Cottle. And so people were able to go online or through other means get the kind of information they needed as quickly as possible. This is a different situation. It's all unfolding so slowly, not like a flood where it's boom. Okay, what do? We rebuild. Okay, that's what we do. Regardless, a couple of general questions. So I know a number of staff that are still on the payroll, are still working, but their job description or their job expectations have changed. And can you talk a little bit about how you're trying to redirect those staff so they have work that they can pitch in on?
Yes, most of the staff that are being redeployed are within our recreation department. The facility staff that work in the facilities that we've closed are being redirected to the maintenance activities I talked about that we're advancing. But the recreation staff are working to support the call center. That will be open 7 days a week, and it's opened yesterday, and they were doing a lot of work to prep for that. They've also been deployed to help our economic development department, who, it's a very small department, as you know, just 2 people in economic development, and they are responding to a significant number of inquiries from local business on how business can support their own staff, on some of the questions about the unfolding information and how to interpret some of the information that's coming forward. So we have some recreation staff deployed to economic development as well.
Thank you. So I just wanted to bring up a conversation around the playgrounds and the growing sense of urgency in the public that we should close our playgrounds. And we've talked, you and I have talked about this almost daily, and I've agreed with the approach the town has been taking. I'm starting to change my perception on what's the right thing to do here. And I know that you will be discussing this at ECC this afternoon. I thought it would be worthwhile to have at least a very brief conversation with council, just so that you would have council's perspective at ACC. I'm not suggesting that council needs to direct the closure of playgrounds at this time through motion, but for a number of reasons, I have in my own mind come to think that perhaps we should close the playgrounds at this time. I appreciate and agree with what you've said about that. I've always said publicly that parents should be taking responsibility, and you know, if they're taking the kids out for a walk or air or exercise, and there's a playground piece of equipment, you know, use common sense. If there's nobody else on the equipment, maybe there's a way it can be used. But I think there's a good argument to be made for being overly cautious in some of our decision-making activity. And I keep coming back to something I read, I think just a week ago, in one of the national newspapers about these same issues, and the statement, the observation was it's always better to be quick than wrong. So if we should close our playgrounds now, in the future we may come to understand that wasn't necessary, but it's better to be cautious than find in the future that there were, in fact, cases that were transmitted perhaps on the playground equipment. So I'm really just throwing this out for input from rest of council so the CAO can bring that back to the ECC meeting. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Well, I applaud administration for taking the steps that have been taken fairly rapidly with closing our facilities and limiting indoor activities with people. Every day we get, there are suggestions about how we should proceed, and I know that your direct contact and interpretation of the medical examiner's recommendations are quite well considered, because, you know, a lot of us hear little bits and pieces of things, but we don't maybe know the most current information that's being provided. One of the aspects of the playgrounds that has come up is that other communities like Cochrane and Calgary have decided to close their playgrounds, even though it's not recommended necessarily by the chief medical officer. And the other issue I think our community is facing is that people want to get out of the city, and they want to go to places that are more open and more comfortable than being in the city during this. It's a very stressful time for people. So I guess the playground issue is, are we in alignment with what our neighbors are doing? And if we're providing more access to amenities than what our neighbors are doing, that may encourage people to come to Canmore for those amenities. The weekend we experienced recently was quite heavily visited in Canmore, and Canmore people were quite concerned about that. I think that we've got an influx of visitors to our community because they're trying to get out of the city. And it was quite good to hear the chief medical officer mention that in one of her daily announcements, that yes, people should get fresh air, but it's not the opportunity to everybody to flock to one place, because it's hard to social distance when you're flocking to one place. So I know that we all have to take the issues into consideration of what the different variables are, but I think it would be good to look at that one issue, and every day there will be new issues. So I just commend you for all the effort that you're making, and our community is stepping up really wonderfully to be there for each other as well, and having our grocery stores staffed and available to the local community is really fantastic. So I think the town's doing a good job that way, but every day we have a set of variables that we have to deal with. So I commend you for looking into that. Thank you.
Councillor Mara.
Thank you, Mayor Boardman. I too would like to reiterate the concern for the playgrounds. And I would like to say first thank you to everybody, including you and your staff and the ECC team, and everybody out there on the front lines, as you have thanked. I would like to also reiterate that. My concern with the playgrounds is it's making our community, anything that makes our community at unease. I think if we can, even if it's a precautionary measure, I think that's something we could look into, because everything we can do, each step makes them feel safer. I think we need to do that. So I'd like us to look into that. So, thank you.
Is there any other perspective from other councillors? Councillor Seeley. The board says Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Boardman.
She's not here.
I'd also like to express my thanks to administration. I think we're dealing with this as well as we can, and top-notch so far. I guess my questions are about the exponential spread, and how we're tracking it, and next steps. It'd be nice to get business back and running
Councillor,
again.
we're just right now looking for feedback on the question of closing the playgrounds.
Oh, closing the playgrounds, okay. For that, I think, I don't know, I'm not an expert on that, but you know, to be cautious right now probably makes sense, but I don't know, I'll have to think about it as I hear input.
Councillor Hillstead.
I also just want to echo most of my fellow councilmen's views on this. Just thank you and your team, and just all frontline workers, everyone out there working hard to try to keep us safe but provided for all of our needs. With the playgrounds, again, it's probably better to be cautious and to be fast and cautious, as Mayor Boardman said. I know personally I'm not taking my family to playgrounds right now, but I also you know, just, we are going a little stir crazy in the house too, so I understand why people would want to take their kids to the playground, because it's hard. Being at home with 3 kids running around all day, it does drive you crazy a little bit sometimes. So getting out there, I know my wife has taken our kids for walks when she can. We just go around our neighborhood. So I just like to encourage people, like, you know, get out there, but, you know, try to keep your distance from others, do what you can, and yeah, so.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and I would want to be clear that I appreciate 100% what you've said about having kids at home. I remember those days, although it was 30 years ago. And but there's so many things that parents can do with their kids out of the house to let them blow off steam and run around and laugh and play, and certainly playgrounds is one option. But I mean, when our kids were that age, there weren't anywhere near as many playgrounds, and we'd go over to River Park and Toboggan at this time of year, or up to the cemetery, or nicer weather, go out for you know, a hike along the trail somewhere, going on an adventure. So there are a number of ways that parents can help their kids get through these times, but if there is a risk of spreading the virus by playground equipment, and that's a big if in my mind, I don't know, then I think it's, well, as I said, I think it might be advisable to reduce that risk. Ms. Hyde, I don't know if either councillors are comfort, okay, they have an input?
Yes, they have emailed me a little bit of input.
Hold on a sec. Sorry, there you go.
All
You
right,
want to read it
come
out?
on. Yes, I have heard from councillors Comfort and McCallum. So, Councillor McCallum says, I am not an expert. Have we asked public health directly if we should close them? And if we close them, then how do we police?
I'm assuming that's a question to me. We have not, I have not spoken to Canmore Public Health, but certainly the medical officer of health has not directed that playgrounds be closed. That being said, she provides daily updates, and I wouldn't be surprised that her office is getting the same sort of public questions and concerns that we have been getting. So whether or not she moves in that direction. But the enforcement question, I think, is a really good one. You know, what does that mean to close a playground? Again, are we asking for the honor system and sort of the social pressure system to close that? We don't have the resources to enforce that. I don't think the intent is that we fence them with snow fencing or whatever. We have a large number of playgrounds. That would be a considerable cost and resource. So, you know, there's a lot being put on Albertans and community members to be socially responsible themselves in all of their daily actions, and that includes how they interact at playgrounds. So I think the messaging has been ramped up since the weekend, both provincially and locally, and I have some confidence that the citizens are getting that message and will modify their behavior accordingly. And so, you know, it's a little bit of a balancing act, because we certainly want to be able to give parents the opportunity to use facilities to help with some of the stressors of keeping young families indoors and at home, and a playground. You know, I have a tot lot very close to me. I walk past it regularly, and especially in the winter and with the snow, you know, you don't see many people using it. So I think it could be used safely, and certainly in response to Mayor Borrellman's concern, and I've heard this as well about the virus living on the steel structures of swing sets or et cetera. So it would be similar to going to the grocery store and putting your child in a cart. If you're putting your child in a swing, you know, I think most parents in these circumstances are carrying the sanitation wipes that, you know, to wipe the cart and, you know, or carrying hand sanitizers to make sure that before and after use they're making sure they're following proper hygiene protocols. And those would be the same protocols in any high-touch area, whether you're sitting on a park bench that's been sat on by somebody else or sitting in a swing set that's been swung in by somebody else.
Yes, I'm just in the spirit of conversation. I mean, it's pretty hard to wipe down a playground structure. It's much easier to wipe down a shopping cart or whatever. But if I understand it, we've taped off the arenas or like the outdoor ice surfaces.
The outdoor ice surfaces, yes, were closed, and mainly though because the maintenance was not able to continue because of the warm weather.
But the side benefit of that is we're discouraging groups.
Correct.
To come and play there. And
correct, yes.
I heard from Mr. Canmore that bylaw, I think, had been going past and finding groups of young hockey players that have ducked under or over, I don't know if it's fencing, like a snow fence or tape, and so they're still going there even though it's clearly marked, and I'm certain bylaw was saying you're supposed to not be in there. If we were to close the parks, the playgrounds, not the parks, the playgrounds at this time, you know, we have simple tools that we put in place just to get the message clearly there. We could tape it with red tape, or we could erect snow fencing and make it that much more difficult. And bylaw could occasionally patrol past, I would think, and not issuing fines. We don't have that in any of our bylaws, so there's no fines to issue. But just to make a point of telling people they have to get serious about social distancing. And also I'm thinking about the general public. If people are, even without understanding or being innocent in their actions, putting others at risk by congregating in a place like a playground, then other residents would be coming by and saying, you know, that's not okay. I really think we have to ramp up that element of management for a number of reasons. And I don't see it as being an onerous or difficult task at this time. Okay, so, sorry, you.
Yes, Councillor McCallum had a follow-up statement. She said, please ask public health directly and have their advice guide your decision-making. We are not microbiologists.
We are not what?
Microbiologists. And Councillor Comfort had a subject line of closed playground, and she says, yes, with messaging.
Yes, with messaging.
Yeah, and if I could just add, Councillor Comfort, her line died, so when we come to a break, I'm just going to call her back. I just don't want to be awkward while you're still talking. Yeah.
Okay, we can always take a short break in between items. Yeah. So unless there's other comments from councillors, have you heard all you need to take back to the discussion at ECC?
Yes.
Do you want me to sit there and share my opinion again?
No, thanks.
You got my opinion clearly noted. Okay. One other thing I did want to ask or suggest for ECC to consider is around locating our mobile messaging boards at the main entry points to Canmore, urging, you know, only essential traffic, stopping in town or something to that effect. I don't know if you've discussed that or not. I'm seeing a yes, so you've discussed that?
We talked about that yesterday, and our manager of protective services, Greg Burt, was going to be working with our communications team to see what most appropriate locations and signs could be put up. Excellent,
that's really good to hear. I don't know how many mobile signs we have. Is it 2 or 3?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, there's 3 main entry points, but Okay, I'm happy to hear ECC's discussing.
I think one of them is in use at the intersection of Railway and Bow Valley Trail for the construction project there, so just...
Oh, right, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, but there's probably others around. I mean, you know, one of the rental play. Okay, not my job right now. Is there anything else from council in the way of questions for the CAO? Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Mayor Borman. I know that the TIP 20 project is proceeding along Railway Avenue, and from what I understand from earlier conversations we had, we have to get in there before the groundwater rises. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
So that project is proceeding, but the reason that we're going forward right now with this is to get that done during this era of low groundwater.
Yes. So that's the deep utility work that's proceeding immediately, and that has to go in ahead of the surface works. So if we weren't able to get that work completed this year, then we would have to delay all of the surface works that are proposed. So we are proceeding, yes, with that project.
Yeah, so that if the community sees that project happening, it's because it has to happen right now, right?
Correct.
So they've got the project people in place to proceed with that currently?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Contracts are signed and all that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a highly visible project, so I just wanted to make sure that, you know, the community knows that we have to go ahead with this right now, because if we have everything in place, it's a critical time to get it done.
I think one of the main messages that we have to hammer as members of council when we talk to the public is that business has to continue. You know, we have to be able to provide essential services now and in the future. And this is one of those things that we have to do to ensure that our underground infrastructure continues to function, yada, yada. Councillor Seeley, I interrupted you earlier. Did you have a question for the CAO?
I was just interested in how we're doing monitoring the situation, and I guess moving forward is kind of a tough question right now. But do we have a feel for where we're at in this whole epidemic?
You know, again, like yourself, we follow the various news updates that come out daily, both from our own provincial medical officer of health, but from the Prime Minister and from other provinces. I think yesterday we all saw the decisions that Ontario and Quebec made, which was a complete close of all non-essential businesses. I was talking with the GM of Municipal Infrastructure this morning. She found the list that those provinces have identified of what essential services are, and it's long. So, you know, there will be some, if we get to that point, and those two provinces are ahead of us on the curve as to the numbers of infected persons. And so we could look to that as likely where we may be in the future. But again, I'm not the expert, the medical expert, and don't have the data to interpret that. So certainly there's some hope that if Alberta does the social distancing well and follows the advice on hygiene protocols and staying at home that is, you know, being disseminated out there, that we can stem that and prevent that spread escalating to those numbers.
Thanks.
If there's nothing else from council for the CAO, thank you very much.
Nope.
Oh, right, Ms. Hyde.
I just had one more comment from Councillor McCallum, who would like to say to the CAO, thank you to your team for all your hard work. I'm grateful for your leadership.
Thank you.
And that's echoed by us all, as you know. I continue personally to have such great confidence in what we're doing here, because I have such great confidence in senior administration and all the staff of the town, and we've seen that my confidence being justified in action over the years. So and from the town as well, you know, I just want to pass that along from the residents of Canmore. We are, as a community, very fortunate to have the people in place here in Town Hall and in our other buildings, so good job. Did you need to reconnect with somebody? I'll just take a brief moment while that happens.
Councillor Comfort. Hello, we've got you back. So you're back on the phone. I'm just going to connect Councillor McCallum with you. Councillor McCallum and Councillor Comfort, we should have you both now. Hi. And then please mute your phone during the presentation.
All good there? Ms. Richardson.
Good morning, Mayor Bowerman and members of council. I'm here today regarding some potential measures to provide property owners flexibility for upcoming utility and property tax payments in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and its widespread impacts, as Ms. DeSoto has been speaking to. As such, our recommendations are that Council direct administration to provide an option for property owners to defer utility payments for the months of April, May, and June 2020 without penalties or interests applied to the deferred amounts, with the deferred balance evenly applied over the payments for the remainder of the calendar year. And similarly, that Council direct administration to provide an option for property owners on the tax installment payment plan, TIP, to defer property tax payments for the months of April, May, and June 2020 without penalties or interest applied to the deferred amounts and with the deferred balance evenly applied over the remainder of the payments for the remainder of the year. So this is a new and unprecedented situation and has created a high level of economic and income uncertainty for residents and business owners in our community. With new information coming out daily, we've really targeted today short-term solutions to provide immediate peace of mind for our property owners. We are monitoring the federal and provincial supports being offered, as well as how other communities are addressing these shared challenges, working on how to achieve a plan with the maximum benefit for our taxpayers. As such, we're committed to coming back at the April 7th meeting with some longer-term recommendations. These are really to address the payments that are coming immediately due for people, and as I mentioned, just to provide that peace of mind. I know those motions were a little bit wordy, so really what we're proposing is an option to defer for both property tax and utility payments for the next 3 months, with no penalties or interest due on those deferred balances. Following that period, rather than a larger lump sum payment due at that time, we're proposing that the balance that has been deferred can then be split over the remaining payments for the rest of the 2020 year to smooth out those amounts for people, again, without any penalties or interest on those amounts. This is a visual of roughly what we're proposing. So for utilities, if you're on the PUP program and are able to continue to make payments, you can stay on that program and continue payments as usual. We have received feedback that the consistency and reliability, predictability of that program is beneficial for families and business owners who are able to take advantage of it. So we do want to continue that program for those who are able to. For those who are looking for the deferral option and are dealing with unexpected changes to their financial situation, we are asking that people notify us if they wish to exercise that option to defer. Currently, our finance team and the IT team are working together on an online form that will be kind of the mechanism of operationalizing this, so we're still working on it, but this is what we're proposing at this time. So they'll have the option to defer the payment, as I mentioned, for that 90 days with the remaining balance, having that split equally over the remaining payments of the year. If you're not on the PUP program, you will also have that deferral option for 90 days, and we can sort out the scheduling and timing of that with the Utilities Department of what those payments look like for the rest of the year. On the property tax side, so the reason the property tax recommendation is only referencing the TIP program is because the deadline for property taxes is usually the last business day of June. So there are currently no payments due for any property owners unless they're enrolled in the TIP program. So for property taxes, if you are on TIP, again, you have the option to continue as usual, or alternatively, if you let us know, you will have the option to put your account essentially on hold until July. So you won't be removed from the program, although that option under both programs always exists for any individuals who choose to exercise it. So if you do choose to utilize this hold, then just know April, May, or June debits will occur, and again, the balance owing would be split equally over the remaining 6 payments of the year. Again, if you're not on TIP, there are no payments due at this time, so this isn't immediately pressing for those individuals or business owners. We're also intending to waive the administration fee that's normally charged on non-sufficient fund payments for both of these programs for the year. That wasn't referenced in the motions. This is just an administrative charge that we usually apply, but again, given the uncertainties lots of our property owners are facing, we're proposing that charge be removed as well.
Just a question on that, and I don't want to interrupt your presentation, but is that's purely an administrative matter, the charge for NSF, and never requires any council direction in any case? Thank you.
Correct. So again, these measures are all really targeted to address the most immediately pressing needs of our property owners, and we continue to monitor the supports offered by other levels of government, as well as working with other communities to understand what they're considering for these shared issues. As more information becomes known, we'll be back at the next meeting on April 7th with more longer-term recommendations is what we propose from this point forward. And that concludes my presentation at this time, and if there are any other questions, I'm happy to address them.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate you and your team coming to council so quickly with this recommendation. And we've already talked about the heightened stress in the community, and we know that, well, hundreds of people have been laid off temporarily or what. And this is one way that the town can help reduce the stress for our residents. For sure, and I applaud that you've come forward with this. And I also appreciate that there's not an urgent, a looming deadline in regards to the rest of the year. So I'm confident that you'll be back and forth in front of council if you see the necessity to implement another long-term deferral for the rest of the year. I have a couple of questions, but first I just want to make a general observation, I suppose, and I understand, or I'm assuming that the reason we can take this step is because we do have a healthy financial situation in the town. We have strong reserve balances that give us some ability to keep the cash flow going.
Correct. So my team has been doing some cash flow projections of what the short term could look like for us. We are planning to cash some short-term investments we have to continue to have flexibility to help our property owners as much as we can. That's one of the reasons we're also proposing that for people who can stay on the programs, that does provide us some cash flow to continue to make payroll, provide those essential services in this community. And then going forward, what I'm hoping is that by having people opt into the program, that does give us a sense of how many people we're looking at, which again just helps us model our cash flow as we look at those longer term solutions.
Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to imagine what kind of resources you'll need to have in place to deal with what might be a very strong response. And if people are they can ask to be, or they can opt out of the TIP and PUP program over the phone or via email, is that right?
I believe those are, yes, the best options that would exist for people right now.
It could be, there'll be hundreds or more. And how are we going to keep up with that? Or I guess, yeah, that's a question I have.
So in the short term, we do have 2 individuals in our property tax and utility departments who are both still working, albeit remotely. And we're also utilizing our front desk staff as they're currently closed to the public, dealing with inquiries over the phone about the general business, but that does free up a little bit of their time to support our team. Additionally, we do have other individuals who are being redeployed, so either other resources within our team, or I would be looking for the support of ECC to potentially redeploy additional resources. At this point, we just don't really know how many people to expect, but we'll ramp up resourcing as we determine that that's required.
Great, thank you. One other question I have, and there are other questions here, but I'm wondering if you've considered a mechanism or means to ensure that commercial taxpayers are passing their deferral savings, if they take them, along to their commercial tenants. I mean, so for my personal example, I have a pottery studio up in Elk Run, and it's a lease space, and I would, as a tenant, expect my landlord to somehow pass that deferral along to me. Will there be a mechanism for us to try to at least underline for the landlords, the commercial landowners, that this is expected?
So this is something we've given some thought to, and I'm not quite sure what formal mechanism we might have to really enforce that behavior. Yesterday, the province released some information about the education tax deferral, and again, I don't think there's a mechanism there either. Their messaging was really that the government encourages commercial landlords to pass along those savings to their tenants through reduced or deferred payments. I think our approach at this point would really be to have a lot of messaging around this so that this option that we're providing is widely known in this community. And as Ms. DeSoto spoke to earlier about other issues, I think to a large extent we are relying on that social pressure right now to help enforce that desired behavior, that really is our expectation.
And I appreciate the difficulty of trying to do anything more strenuous. And I know a number, probably most of the commercial landlords in Canmore. In fact, I've had leases with a couple of them. And I know that the landlords, the commercial property owners in Canmore are really, really considerate and caring of their commercial tenants. I'm not going to name names, but we all know who most of the landlords are. And I'm really quite confident that locally the landlords, commercial landlords, will get this and respond appropriately. But a number of the commercial properties in town are owned by people, I don't know where. Maybe somewhere else in Canada, maybe somewhere in the US. And are they going to care that much about us? I mean, if businesses are forced to close, which many are worried about, the landlord, wherever, is just going to figure, okay, when things increase, I can lease that out again. Anyways, I'm just venting, I guess, a bit, but I appreciate that you've brought this forward, and that perhaps we'll just have to use social influence to make sure that commercial landlords do pass these deferrals along. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Thank you for your presentation. It's quite a creative concept you've provided with us, because we know that everybody's very worried right now, and this is a nice short-term addressing of that. Is the TIP program available to both residential and non-residential clients?
I believe so, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
because I don't know that, because I'm not involved in any non-residential properties. But so that's quite a lot of accounts, I would imagine. Do you have any idea of how many that is?
Correct. So I just got the most up-to-date numbers from my team this morning. So we currently have 5,324 accounts on the TIP program. So that represents about 45% of our taxable accounts.
Oh, okay. And the taxes are due at the end of June for those people that are not on the TIP, right? But there's no change for those people. They're essentially you have to pay your taxes on time if you're not on the tip, and you have to pay it by June 30th.
Correct.
At this point in time, I mean, things can change if there's any other government programs that come along.
Or that could come back to council for a change
Right, so I mean,
for June 30th.
yeah, if something is recommended by us, or if there's some relief from other levels of government, those could be incorporated. If you're not on the PUP program, your utilities are only due every 2 months, correct?
Correct.
So how is the 90-day going to align with the 2-month payment due dates for utilities?
So for now, we've worded the motion as referencing April, May, and June, just to provide some clarity. As we get closer to the end of that period, really, we're just proposing measures for the next 90 days. And then my intent is that, as I'd mentioned, this is really just short term. As we get closer to the end of that period, we can figure out what we want to do from there for the remaining months. So the motion is referencing those particular months to provide some clarity, but again, we can revisit that close to the end of this window.
But this opportunity is available to both subscribers, both the people that pay monthly and the people that pay every 2 months?
Absolutely.
Okay.
In the flow, that's why the language is a little bit different in that because the payments are bi-monthly, that's why I've just kind of encouraged them to reach out to our utilities department to sort out the scheduling and amounts of those remaining payments, just because of the bi-monthly,
Right.
it's a little bit different.
Okay. My other question is, the town, if you give relief for people with NSF, if you give them that relief, I don't think the banks will, so I don't think that's the best mechanism for people to not pay, because they need to make that arrangement before they don't pay, because the bank will not be as generous, I don't think, as the town.
No, we're waiving the fees that we charge to provide as much forgiveness as we can to people who are facing uncertainty right now with amounts coming in. But yes, to your point, there are often other charges that they'll incur, but we won't be adding to that.
Right, but I think it would be good for people to know that that's not the best mechanism. The best mechanism would be to arrange with the town in advance of those due dates so that we can realign these payments. However, I think it would also be interesting for people to know what they're facing if the deferral happens. Is there any way that you can give them some idea that, you know, your deferred amount would, your current amount is this per month, your deferred amount would be this per month? Is there going to be an opportunity for people to sort of weigh the balance of, you know, what financial consideration there is for deferral?
So our intent as of right now, so for the utilities, we will still be doing the meter reads. There will still be bills going out, so people know what amounts they're facing and can budget accordingly. And then in terms of that smoothing over the rest of the year, I think that's communications that can happen with our team and your personal financial or your business's financial circumstances to make the best decisions. We can utilize the form to kind of opt in, but you have questions about what those amounts could look like. Our team is there to support individuals in making the right choice, or businesses, the right choice for them.
I think that would be really good for people to understand that, you know, it's a deferral and the cost will be spread over the next 6 months if it's deferred in the first 6 months. So,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you know, to that point, I think all of us should understand, if we don't, that all of these things that are being suggested, not only by the town, but by other authorities, that when it's talked about a deferral, like I know banks are offering deferrals on mortgage payments, sooner or later, there has to be a mechanism to repay. So one of the things I like about this proposal is it doesn't put everybody in that bag. Those of us that are able to continue to make those monthly payments will likely prefer to, because if it's a 3 months worth of payments and they come due, it's going to be a big chunk, you know, out in the future. So your point is really quite valid, Councillor. Councillor Mara.
Thank you, Mayor Borman, and thank you, Ms. Richardson, for your report, and to your team for doing all this work on such a short period of time. I just wanted to, a couple of my questions have just been answered, so I only have one other comment, and that was echoing what Mayor Borman said, and I know for a fact that the community landlords, several of them have come together and already deferred rent, so I'm sure they're willing to pass on anything that they are being deferred onto their clients, because as we know, landlords still have their bills to pay, and the more help we give to them also, we just pass it on. So I just want to put it out there. I can't speak to those who are not here physically in the community, but we just hope that they pass it on. Thank you.
Are there any questions from our fellow councillors who are not in the room? Could you read them into the record? Oh yes, you need a mic, don't you? Let's just leave that mic on, shall we?
This question is for Councillor McCallum. It's similar to that, actually, I think the statement that you just made, Councillor Mira, but it's more in the form of a question. So she says, the mayor asked the question about deferral and commercial landlords. I have the same question, but for residential. Is there a way to ensure that deferrals are passed on to residential tenants?
And I guess from my perspective, whether we're talking about non-residential or residential, I think unfortunately my answer is the same, that I don't know of a formal mechanism that exists. We'll really be looking to that social pressure, and that I think it's very clear that that is Council's will, that is our intent with these recommendations, that is the case. And that's something that we can continue to monitor, feedback from the community about, whether we hear that that's actually happening or not, and consider it again going forward as we get that feedback.
You know, in thinking about that, and it's a really valid question, we're moving slowly into this. We're talking about a 3-month thing right now, and we'll learn a lot in that temporary relief program. If what we learn is that landlords aren't passing along and we don't have a mechanism, then if we do have to go into a long-term deferral for the rest of the year, it will be complex, but we can talk about some structure to monitor that. So for now, I'm going to continue to suggest that residents, business owners, and renters use some social messaging to keep their landlords, you know, passing the deferrals along. Was there anything from Councillor Comfort? Are there any other questions at this time for Ms. Richardson then? Seeing none, thanks very much for putting this together in very short order. On behalf of our tax-paying and utility-paying friends and neighbors, I appreciate your quick action on this.
Thank you.
So at this point then, I will move that Council direct administration to provide an option for property owners to defer utility payments for the months of April, May, and June 2020 without penalties or interest applied to the deferred amounts, with the deferred balance evenly applied over the payments for the remainder of the calendar year. And I'll speak in support of that motion. I had no doubt that the Finance Department would be doing this work. If they hadn't, I would expect that Council would be having a different conversation today and directing it. But we don't have to doubt the fact that everybody that works for the town of Canmore is finding and trying hard to find ways to address the situation within their own realm of involvement. So I'm really quite pleased to support this motion, and I like the fact that it's not mandatory. Many people won't choose to opt in, so it's a nice balance, and will help us get through the next 3 months. It'll help some people to a small extent to get through the next 3 months. So I will support this motion, and thank you for bringing it forward. So other discussion on the motion? Councillor Mayer, your light's on? Okay. But you're welcome to speak to the motion. If there's no other, is there any comments or discussion from?
No, you'll have to wait a second for them to vote.
Yeah, I'll wait for a minute in case Councillors Comfort and McCallum want to speak.
Councillor McCallum, I'm in favor. I think you're adamant that this is the right thing to do.
So if viewers weren't able to hear, Councillor McCallum weighed in with support for the motion and indicated this is the right thing to do. And I'm assuming Councillor Comfort is, pardon?
If you call the question, then we'll get a vote.
Oh yeah, I'll have to call the question. I'll then call the question. Those in favor?
I can hear you too. Councillor Comfort and Councillor McCallum, the mayor just called the question.
Aye. This is Councillor McCallum, aye.
Aye, from Councillor McCallum. Councillor Comfort? Oh, no, she's gone. Lost her.
All right, well, I feel certain Councillor Comfort would support the motion if she were here.
Let me go back.
It's a good thing it's a short agenda this morning, huh? Yeah.
Okay.
I think we'll move on. So,
Hi, is that Councillor Comfort? No.
It is. Yeah, and Councillor McCallum.
Councillor Comfort, would you like to vote on the first motion?
You bet. I'll say aye.
Perfect.
okay, those opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to the second motion, and I'll put it on the table. The motion that Council direct administration to provide an option for property owners on the tax installment payment plan, or TIP, to defer property tax payments for the months of April, May, and June 2020 without penalties or interest applied to the deferred amounts, and with the deferred balance evenly applied over the remainder of the payments for the remainder of the calendar year. Discussion on that motion. I won't repeat what I said on the previous motion, but I have the same sentiment. No discussion on the motion. I'll call the question. Those in favor? And from the other councillors, are they in favor of the motion?
Aye. That was Councillor McCallum.
Aye.
Aye from Councillor
Okay,
Comfort.
motion's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. And thank you again, Ms. Richardson.
Aye, Councillor Comfort.
Got it.
Thank you. We got you.
Moving on then to item H2, the Family Resource Network Services. We do have an in-camera portion on this. Is that before public or after?
I don't know if it matters.
Doesn't matter, then let's hear your presentation on behalf of Ms. Brown. Thank you. Or is she not going to be on the...
No, I'm waiting for the cleanup crew.
Oh, beg pardon.
I'm going as fast as I can.
Actually, I wasn't planning to do it myself, but thank you for...
Oh, yeah. Okay, let's go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Whew. It's a new world order.
Indeed it is.
So, Your Worship and members of council, I actually thought I would, just following up on Ms. DeSoto's presentation, yesterday in her daily announcement, Dr. Hinshaw announced a text service you can sign up for. So if you text 393939, that's the number, and then you just write in COVID-19 HOPE, or maybe it's COVID-20 Hope, I should double check that. But, no, it's COVID-19 Hope.
Is there a hyphen there? Or
No,
is it-
just one word, COVID-19 Hope, no spaces, to 393939. You get a daily text of a hopeful message and a link to resources. So they just launched it yesterday. I signed up. I got my first text this morning. It was lovely. So I think it's a great thing to promote just in terms of people getting access to positive messages and information and resources that are available. So just want to promote that while I have the microphone. I'm here on behalf of Ms. Brown to talk to you about the FRN, and there's two recommendations in your report. The first is that Council authorize administration to enter into a contract with the province for delivery of the Family Resource Network, and that bit is what we need to go in camera for. The province has said that nothing about the contract can be stated publicly yet, so any questions on the contract or a conversation about the details of the contract needs to be done in camera. The more public portion, though, is that we're also asking Council to transfer the $56,000 of the Town of Canmore funded portion of the 2020 budget that was for the parent link, which is already approved, and that be transferred to the Family Resource Network Department to fund 2020 operational expenses in addition to the provincial grant. So as you know, for 17 years, the town received a provincial contract for parent link services across the Bow Valley, and these were services provided to children and caregivers, specifically focusing on children ages 0 to 6. In 2019 November, the parent link program was terminated, and just as a reminder, it will wrap up on March 31st. Unfortunately, the parent link was going to have a big closing party this Friday, once we are back to whatever the new normal looks like and operating the FRN, we'll do a closure and a thank you to Parent Link at that time. After the closure of the Parent Link, or the termination of the Parent Link contract, the province announced a new model of care for children ages 0 to 18. And as part of that new funding model, they issued an expression of interest for the Family Resource Network services. In January of this year, Council directed administration to submit an application for that expression of interest. And in preparation of the town preparing that EOI for these Family Resource Network services, administration completed a full review of the available children's services within the Bow Valley and the key services that were provided by the Parent Link Center that would now no longer exist in the community. And the gaps that we found if we looked at what the services were throughout the Bow Valley and what would disappear or go away once there was no more Parent Link, there were 5 key things. One was a safe place for families and parents to connect, a resource for early childhood development, developmental screening, early interventions such as identifying things like postpartum depression, sibling rivalry, parenting anxiety, things that if addressed early can de-escalate and if not addressed can lead to more critical problems, and the incorporation of family perspectives into Town of Canmore operations and plans. So from that, administration developed an application for a family resource network. And they're recommending that the Town of Canmore create a new department under the Community and Social Development area that will incorporate the Family Resource Network. We're also recommending that Council transfer that $56,000 that's currently in the Parent Link budget to the new Family Resource Network department. To date, we haven't spent any of that $56,000 because of the termination notice. A few staff have moved on and found other work. We haven't needed to use any of that $56,000, so it's still fully available for the remainder of the year. And if approved, it will be utilized for a position in that FRN for the remaining 9 months of the year. Just to be clear, in future years, so in 2021 or 2022, we would need to top up that $56,000 with no more than $10,000 in order to make that a full 12-month salary for the position. In addition to this $56,000 that we're asking for, we did also negotiate with the province to acknowledge the municipality's contribution to the FRM. So the in-kind support would be valued at $50,000 for facility support in terms of rent, and other facility type work in what is currently the ParentLink space, and then about $180,000 of corporate services support when you look at HR, IT, finance, executive office, communication, and insurance costs. So initially, the FRN will run out of the same ParentLink, the same space as ParentLink. We had been actually working on doing an analysis of that space and whether or not it was the right space and other spaces in town, but that might be better suited for that. With the tight timelines of the contract and now the pandemic, we do not have time to be up and running by April 1st and making any kind of significant facility change. So we will get up and running with the FRN, and then we'll review various town-owned facilities to figure out what is the right place going forward for the FRN to operate out of. Different than the ParentLink Center, FRN staff we're also proposing would be placed on the town salary grid, meaning that their compensation would be tied not only to provincial funding, which is how the ParentLink staff were set up, was 100% provincial funding, but instead that they would get cost of living and performance increases along with other town staff. They'd also be part of the town's benefits program, which ParentLink staff are part of the benefits program. That's part of what the $56,000 is used for, but they're not on cost of living or performance. So we're suggesting with the FRN that change. But the staff contracts would explicitly state that their positions are tied to provincial funding, and that without provincial funding they may need to be terminated. Although this program would be part of Canmore's FRN department, since it is the program would not necessarily, the $56,000 would be part of the FRN, so that's to fund a position, but it would not be tied to provincial outcomes because the town is funding it. So we would be able to meet municipal outcomes and municipal priorities through that position in a way that we will not with other fully provincially funded FRN positions. So it gives us a little bit of flexibility moving that $56,000. In terms of alternatives, council can accept that we go for the contract but not give the additional funding for this portion. That's certainly an alternative. It would be just considered, if we don't do that, the $56,000 would be considered surplus and would go back into our general municipal coffers. You could also accept the grant and request that we contract out our service delivery so that those staff would be considered contract employees similar to how ParentLink staff are and are not on the cost of living or performance increase program. So administration is requesting council's approval for operational expenditures as part of the town's FRN department. In addition, we're requesting the allocation of the $56,000 from ParentLink to the FRN. That's really all I had to say for my presentation. Again, because the contract is not released, we can't share any details, but we are happy to go in camera to have a discussion on the contract.
Great, thanks. And just before we go in camera, question to the report, and if it's sensitive, then we can discuss it in camera. But so the $56,000 in cash for facility support has always been part of the discussion leading up to this, and it reflects what we've always provided to ParentLink and similar services.
Yeah, there's a couple of different numbers. So the $56,000 is actually not facility support. That is, that currently the $56,000 in the town's budget is an actual budgeted council approved amount. We have provided, though, about $50,000 a year of in-kind facility support because that's our space.
Right.
If we
so
were to charge rent.
That in-kind support that I'm referring to.
Yes.
That's historically been happening.
Yes, the only thing that's really different here is that we're being explicit about it. It
right.
sort of has happened as a matter of course, and now we're trying to be clear about it.
And yes, that's you're right. The $180,000 that you referenced is also, so that's always, or there's been some amount of support offered to the programming from corporate services, and we've never really put a number on it. It's never been part of an approved budget, but it's always been there. So effectively, we're saying that unstated supports in the past would continue, only they would be stated now.
Correct.
And I'm not certain how those costs that ultimately are covered by the taxpayers here are they reflected in the, I don't know what sort of a contract might exist between the service that we're providing, the hub, with some of the links that are not operated by the town of Canmore. Is that in-kind support of well over $200,000 part of the conversation in those extended conversations?
You know, it will need to be as a go forward. So right now, because the contracts aren't finalized and we're not allowed to speak with them, we're also not allowed to, we don't know what other communities have received, what other spokes have received.
I see.
So it's all confidential at this point. We have a rough sense of where funding may or may not be allocated, but we don't know any specifics. So going forward, that will be a conversation that we need to have with, potentially with our other communities in the Bow Valley.
And that understanding, I'm sure, was conveyed to the province in the discussions on this contract.
Yes, that was part of the negotiation of the contract. And I will say, just had another thought on your last question. There has been some conversation between our Community Social Development Department and the town of Banff, as an example. Mm-hmm. So when we were the lead for the administration of the Parent Link, they're the lead for the administration of settlement services and immigration partnership, right? So there was some sense that they housed one, we housed the other. We could get into details, or we could kind of consider that a wash across the community. But that's been intentional in setting up who is managing and maintaining what programs, so that it's not all housed under one umbrella and unnecessarily overloading one community.
Thank you for that. That helps me understand. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Cottle. So I just want to be clear about the $56,000 is going to fund a position that is a town strategic kind of position, as opposed to being specifically FRN outcomes. Is that somehow going to address the gaps that were left by Parent Link being dissolved?
Yeah, so, and this will be more clear, I think, when we go in camera. So what we're suggesting is to bridge a gap between that analysis of what they looked at and what would be missing in the community when Parent Link dissolved, and then looking at what the province was willing to fund under the new FRN, and then what gaps still remained. And the idea is that that $56,000 would start to fill the gaps that still remained.
Because the program that's being proposed is a stay and play social connection program?
Correct.
Is that sounds kind of like what Parent Link was doing?
Fairly similar.
Okay.
Less ability to provide the same level of service, but a similar type of program.
Okay, well, that sounds great, thank you.
And just before we go in camera, so once everything the dust is settled, and then we will be able to share the details with the public, and we'll be able to speak publicly about the financial aspect of it, not only the operational aspect of it. So everything will be public once we move through this provincial process.
Correct.
Thank you. Are there any other questions at this time for Ms. Cottle? So now I'll move that Council go in camera to protect information related to the town's negotiating position in accordance with Section 25(1)(c)(3) of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Those in favor? I think we're in camera. Okay.
Going in camera, so you'll be on the phone now only, Councillors.
Can you turn that volume up or anything?
It's up as high as it goes.
Okay. component?
No, just the voting on the recommendations.
So thank you very much for, well, thank you and your staff, your team, Lisa Brown and all of her colleagues. I mean, this has been a horrendous piece of work.
They've done a really good job.
They've done an amazing job, and I just keep saying it, but I think we're so fortunate in this town to have the people that we do working for the town of Canmore. So with that, I will move that council authorize administration to enter into a contract with the province for the delivery of a family resource network. Speaking to the motion, I'll support the motion. It's been very uncertain, long before COVID-19 uncertainty. What's going to be happening with our social services in the town that so many families and residents really depend heavily on, with the announcement from the province some time ago that this service will just end. It's been really difficult to make our way through this uncertainty and pop out the other side with some positive direction. And I believe, while I'm disappointed that it's come to this, I believe that the continuation or the new service that we'll be able to offer will be of great benefit to so many people in our community, and will help to keep families strong, our community strong. So I am certainly happy to support this motion. Is there other discussion on the motion? Your light's on.
I know, I pushed my button.
It's not showing up on the board, so go ahead. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Rush. Mayor Borman. I too will support this motion. I think what's been proposed here is quite good. The hub services that are being provided are going to benefit the community, and in a broader scope, I think, than how we had the original Parent Link programming. Also, I think we have really good staff in place to actualize this. And because it is a hub program with other agencies providing services as well, I think it will be well coordinated through our staff. We've got good staff in place to be able to deliver this, and I think we're going to end up with actually a fairly good program, so we'll look forward to the specifics when we can share them.
Is there other discussion on the motion? Nothing via email? Yes?
Thank you. From Councillor McCallum, she says, I support the motion. This service will be one of the many tools that we require for recovery. Sure.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Go ahead.
Can I say something?
Whoever it is, yes. Okay, so we're going to move on, and I will call the question.
There's two motions.
I only put the one. Okay. Oh, no, I'm on the wrong report. Yeah, we're just on the first motion right now. Okay, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Can we turn that off? Okay.
Councillors, we've called the question on the first motion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion's carried unanimously. I'll then move that council transfer the $56,000 of the town of Canmore funded portion of Bow Valley Parent Link's 2020 approved budget to the new Family Resource Network Department to fund 2020 operational expenses in excess of the provincial grant revenue. And for the same reasons I spoke in support of the previous motion, I will support this motion. Is there anybody that wants to speak directly to this motion? I'm going to take that as a no. I'll call the question. Those in favor? Councillors Comfort and McCallum.
This is Councilor McCallum, I vote aye.
Councilor McCallum?
I vote aye.
Yep.
Councilor Comfort?
I vote aye.
Thank you.
Okay, motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, everybody. And if anybody's actually watching this at home, rest assured we'll have different technology in place for the next council meeting, I hope. Okay. Where are we now? Back to
Thank you.
so we've completed H2 and L1. We'll move to the in-camera L2. So I'll move the council go in camera. Those in favor? We're in camera. We're in camera.
Councilors, we're going in camera again, so we'll be back with no video.
Okay, so I'm just here on behalf of Chief Gaylor. He's also in isolation.
Thank you at home for your patience. Okay.